Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So I am here to talk about leadership. So the first thing I want to do is find out what my audience looks like. How many leaders do I have in the audience? Okay. So now I have 40 minutes to change your minds. Not you all, because you raised your hand, but everyone that didn't raise your hand, I have some information for you. Okay, what is it? What do you think of when you think of the word leader? Oftentimes we think about a giant, a mythical person like Steve Jobs is an innovation leader. General MacArthur is a military leader. And one of the things about these people is they're few and far between, and they're very far away from us. But what most of us need, every team you're on, every organization you belong to, they need leaders today, almost every day, and we need them near us. So I'm going to talk to you about what I think leadership is. I think a leader is a person who makes the people around them better. And so if you can make an individual or a team better at performing whatever's ahead of them, then you're a leader. Leaders are the people we look to when we want to confront the next challenge. That can be curing a disease. That can be releasing the next big product. It can be winning a ball game. It can be something as small as getting a small team through a global pandemic. Every challenge you have in front of you, you look to, or you are a leader. So now, with that new definition, what does being a leader mean? Is it the person out marching in front and somehow through their charisma or their correctness of vision, we all follow them? Maybe. I think that's a little outdated. If you are the person, or there is a person who's going to make your team better, there are two pieces of that. One of them is the direction you're going, and you got to figure out where you're going. And then the second part is bring the team with you, get people to follow you in that direction. Let's take those somewhat separately. Figuring out the direction to go to, figuring out the next step, does not mean knowing all the answers. In fact, it more often means knowing what the right questions are and asking them to the right people, and asking them to tons of people and getting lots of different perspectives. I learned a lot about leadership from both my parents, who were both Air Force officers. When I was 11 years old, my dad got transferred, so the whole family got transferred from Nebraska to Norway. Getting there meant shipping the car over, getting people over, meeting up in a port in France, driving through Europe, and taking a ferry to Norway. Now, my parents were good at a ton of things, but neither one of them could speak French. So we land in France, and imagine the shock of an 11-year-old who's told to sit in the front seat and use her single year of middle school French to help my father navigate through France and Belgium to get to the German-speaking countries that he understood. So I sat there, and you know what? In middle school French, you do learn how to ask where something is. You learn the difference between right and left and straight. And my dad and I worked through iteratively how to get to our hotel, how to get to the gas station. This was, you can probably tell by looking at me, that when I was 11, there was no Google Maps, there was no handheld GPS. We did things the old-fashioned way. We asked perfect strangers where the next thing was. So what did my dad do? He had to get his family, his team somewhere, and he had a resource, which was an 11-year-old who knew some French. And together, we figured out how to move forward. It didn't mean he wasn't in charge, that he was asking me things, but it did mean he knew how to use what he had, and he knew who to ask what. Leading in today's world is the same. You don't always need an 11-year-old who speaks French, but you do need to know what your database person says, and you need to know what your Kubernetes expert says. And I'm just talking about my industry, but any industry, you need to know what your experts think, but you also need to know maybe what someone who's done this before thinks, or some lesson they learned. I heard Jay talking earlier about experience means having made the mistake somewhere else. Find those people and figure out what mistake you could possibly avoid. So after you've done all this and you've really listened to people, I'm not asking you to do everything somebody else tells you to do. You're the person who has to synthesize that information, pick a reasonable direction, and also pick the time when you need to reevaluate and maybe you need to ask some more questions. But now you have figured out the direction the team should go. Well, sometimes you know the right direction and nobody follows you, either because they have their own direction that they want the team to go in, or they just don't like yours. In order to lead a team, you need to understand a team. And I learned the biggest lesson about differences in motivation when I was coaching my son's t-ball team. So first day of the season, I'm a new coach. If any of you have either played or seen a t-ball game, one team goes up, everybody bats, and then they sit down and the next team gets up and everybody bats because there's nobody in the field that can make an out. So this goes on for 3 innings, you have your hot dogs and you go home. Well, we were 2.5 innings into that kind of game. And somehow miraculously, my team's in the field, my son's playing first base, and 2 batters in a row hit little dribblers over to first, and my son reaches down, picks them up, and can't help but step on first. So we've got 2 outs, a few batters come up, another batter comes up and hits this little loop, and my son runs over and catches it, much to everybody's shock. The game is over, and my t-ball team won. Yay, exactly. We have our hot dogs. I give what I hope is an inspirational speech during the hot dogs that the kids will remember for the rest of their lives. We get in the car and go home. I'm in the front seat, convinced this is what Willie Mays' mom thought the first time she saw him play baseball. My son's in the back seat, couldn't be less happy. He was sullen, he was upset. And so, as any good coach, I know what the problem is, and I give him a pep talk. So I tell him how proud I am of him, what a great job he did. And he, single-handedly got those 3 outs. And his question to me, which I will never forget, was, then why did you make us stop playing? And this is even when, so my son is 23 now. And I think about that story every time someone's behavior doesn't make sense to me. Because even when you think you should know what their goal is, you don't always know. And the only way to find out is to talk to them and to ask and to know your team. To lead your team, you need to understand your team. And to understand your team, you need to listen to them. And when you're out there doing all this listening, I've got to say, sometimes you hear really interesting things about people. You find out what success looks like to them or what reward looks like to them. Some people want a promotion. Some people want a different job. Some people want your company to send them to school for a semester or something. Some people just want flexibility because they have a sick child or sick parent to take care of. So you'll hear about them, but you'll also hear what they think about you. And I think most of you have probably heard the expression that feedback is a gift. Well, feedback is a gift that doesn't always come wrapped in a pretty package that's easy for you to understand. Sometimes feedback feels more like a Molotov cocktail thrown through the window. It comes in hot, you disagree with it, you think it's unfair, you think the other person's stupid. And this is a life's journey to understand feedback, to hear feedback, and decide what piece of it you actually want to do something about. So I always try to ask the question, what would the world have to look like for me to agree with this person? Now, that helps me understand their perspective and the feedback they're giving me. I am not at all saying that you should take every piece of feedback you get, you should believe it's true and you should react to it. What I am saying is that you can't figure out the pieces of feedback you get from your team. You can't figure out which of those pieces are worth listening to unless you approach each one with a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of, I wouldn't have guessed they thought that about me or about my idea. Let me look at that. And then through what you know to be true, what your values are, the core of who you are, you can decide which of those things you act on, which of those things you make a change in response to. So we've talked about, can I just pause for a second? Heaven, this clock is frozen and I have no idea how much time I have. I thought 34 minutes, 56 seconds, but it's been saying that for a long time. I don't want to keep you all here all night. So I do want to know when I should stop talking. Okay, so we've talked about how you come up with the idea that you can believe in and that you want to move the team forward in, and then how you talk to the team and connect with your team and inspire them to move in that direction. So now, if I stop here, I've prepared all of you to go run a department of a Fortune 500 company, given that that's what you want to do, or a large nonprofit. But what about when you're not in charge? What about when you're one on a team that may or may not have an effective leader? Or especially if you're a new member of the team, what do you do then? I truly believe you do nothing differently. You still have to talk to your experts. You still have to talk to people whose perspective are different than you. And I don't mean just your experts. You do talk to your experts, of course, but you talk to the people that might have a slightly different opinion or drastically different opinion than you, just to hear what they have to say. And you understand your team. There are moments every day where you can lead from any position. You don't have to be the manager of a team or the vice president of a team to tell someone, you know, you seem to be really good at writing. Have you thought about volunteering to do the team newsletter? Or you don't have to be officially in charge of anything to reflect back to someone something good you saw them do, or if they're struggling for help, offer to help them. You don't have to have any title. You don't have to be at any pay grade to be able to do that. The other thing you don't have to be in charge of anybody to do is to behave in a way and do your work in a way that inspires other people. So that doesn't always lead to someone noticing you, someone who does have power, noticing you and saying, I'm going to promote that person. That's not always how it ends up. It can end up that way. But sometimes leading is just impacting positively the people around you and making them better at their job. Now, I told you I coached my boys in basketball or baseball, and I love baseball. I know a lot about baseball. I fielded winning teams in baseball. During other seasons, my kids played other sports. And I don't know anything about basketball. I enjoy watching it on television. I know Shaq is good, but I really don't know anything about basketball. So when my kids played basketball, at the end of the game, they would come over to me and I would say, I love watching you play. What did you like about the game? And my son might tell me, well, you know, I did really well at, I can't even remember to this day, this sort of skill, but I really blew this. And I would say, well, what's hard about that? And eventually some of the other kids on the team would come over and I would ask them all the same questions. This went on for the 3 years that my son played basketball. And one day the coach on another team said, you know, I started using your post-game process on my teams. And I was like, I didn't even know I had a post-game process. But he went, and his kids loved basketball and played all the way through high school. And he told me how it really helped him understand what his team knew, like what they'd gotten from practices and what they were still working on. Now, I was lucky enough that he came and told me that. And that did make me feel like I had made an impact on somebody. Have any of you ever had the experience that man had, where you see somebody doing something and it inspires you to do your work differently? I see a lot of you nodding. How many of you, every time that happens, you go tell that person the impact they had on you? Really? You tell them every single time? You run people down in the street and you tell them? I think most people don't. And so if you do the math, if most people don't tell every single person that impacted them, that they impacted them in a positive way, then I can almost guarantee every single person in this room has had that kind of impact on somebody else, and you don't even know it. So now, how many people in this room are leaders? Why is every hand in this room not going up in the air? Because I can keep talking. I have 20 minutes and 32 seconds left, and I have a few other things to say. But every single one of you is a leader in a way that you probably don't even understand. Now, like I said, sometimes you don't even hear about it. Sometimes something you do turns into something amazing. Back to my baseball coaching career, one of the parents of a kid that I coached through T-ball, coach pitch, and a couple of other levels, but probably up till he was 8 or 9 years old. You know, when you're dealing with that many 8-year-old boys, you have to be very organized, and you have to have little stations, and you have to have instructions, and you have to have routines, and people know what they're doing. Well, this parent came over to me one day after a game and said, I know you're an engineer. I know you've done hardware and software, and I see how organized you are. We have an opening at SunPower for someone to manage the introduction of a whole new kind of solar panel. Why don't you apply for the job? I was in telecom, hated it, and it was one of the best career moves I ever made. And it was all because somebody saw me be particularly organized with 8-year-old boys. So sometimes you don't even hear about it. And sometimes someone sees something, as long as you keep at this, and it turns into something wonderful. So can I get a show of hands again about how many people in this room are leaders? Okay, there's somebody in the back I'm coming after, but the rest of you. Okay, now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the elephant in the room. When you have leadership qualities, whether you're part of a team or you're in a leadership position, and you don't look like or sound like or have the same educational background as either the other people on the team or people that they view as leaders, then there is an additional barrier. It's real, it exists, and there's nothing I'm going to say up here today that makes all the isms go away. Elitism, racism, sexism, you name it. I can't make that go away, but we can name it and talk about how it affects your leadership journey differently. What I would argue is that it's all the same things I talked about. You still need to talk to your experts. You still need to understand your team, but you also have to have a little bit of a team behind you. And one of the things I love about just the name Mentor Mesh is that you don't need one mentor, because that person doesn't know everything. That's a fallible person who knows if they can help you. But you need a team, and you need this mesh of people who are in your corner. And sometimes they might not be completely in your corner, but they're honest with you. And you can listen to them and you can hear, or they can be the ones that tell you what happens in the room that you're not in. I have had the benefit of both people who are cheerleaders for me, who make excuses for every mistake I make and like, oh, you wouldn't have known, or no one else would have even gotten that far. But I've also had people who tell me all the things I've done wrong. And those conversations are important. And you need both. You can't always have people telling you the things that you should have done differently and the things that you did wrong. You need them, but you also need those folks that can help you from a position of wanting you to succeed. So keep doing your networking, keep looking for those people, but you also need to be those people. It has been my experience in working with sometimes quite a bit younger people that sometimes the thing they say to me is the thing that changes my approach. So I haven't always been a vice president at Salesforce, believe it or not. That's not how I came out of school. I once had someone who worked for me, who I had done a lot to help him learn the corporate environment, really take me to task for not putting my name in the consideration for a big promotion. And it was his perspective that really made me rethink, was I doing anything to kind of torpedo my own career? And so I wouldn't have even gotten that perspective had I not been actively mentoring him. So you need to do all the things I talked about for leadership. You need your mentor mesh. And then I'm going to challenge you to change a little bit, maybe the way you show up. And by that, I mean, I don't want you to ever preface a question with, I don't really know this subject very well, but could someone explain this to me? Or I'm kind of new here, but you can play a newbie card, sure. But don't sell yourself short. You've got enough people doing that for you. Don't do it to yourself. Don't ever come in acting like you don't deserve to be there. You may not have the same educational background they do. They don't have the same life experience as you do. So don't, I think, I can't remember who it is that talks about leaving before you leave. So especially women that sort of are like, oh, I have a family someday, so I'm not going to take that job because who knows, 3 or 4 years from now, I might need to take a step back. A lot of people do that. A lot of people who aren't sure they belong do that every day at every meeting. And I don't mean leaving, but I mean undermining themselves. I work with a woman right now who's a program manager, and I have developed a system with her where I ping her in Slack every time I hear her at a meeting say, I don't really understand this. And then she asks a wonderful question, an absolutely clarifying question. So don't do that to yourselves. That's part of the extra challenge that people who don't look like everybody else looks face in their leadership journey. Now, if you leave this room today, you do everything I've told you to do. You develop your mentor network, you become a mentor, you ask all the right questions, you inspire people, you don't sell yourself short. You're still going to, from time to time, fail. I know I have. Sometimes you're going to fail because you have the absolute right product, the absolute right market, and a pandemic stops the world and nobody's buying anything. Or you're going to fail because you made a mistake. I know I have. Some days I let ego, fear, carelessness, busyness get in the way, and I don't do the job that I need to do, and I am therefore unsuccessful. But not only are you a leader of your team, whether it's officially or unofficially, you're also the leader of your own story. And when you fail, you get to decide if that's the end of the story or it's a cliffhanger before you get to the next chapter. And don't let it be the end of the story. You will absolutely fail. I heard some of the conversations about failure in the panel, and I always say good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. And so all the mistakes you make get you to a point where you are confident and effective. I will say more confident, more effective, because you are all effective leaders right now. And you will only get better if you learn from your mistakes, you listen to your teams, and you live what's true inside of you. I think I'm done 11 minutes early, but I'm not sure that clock is exactly right. Anyway, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Thank you.
This mic on? All right, thank you, Kristin. So
So we're
now,
gonna do questions, right? Yeah.
now we're ready to do questions. Folks have questions. We have the microphone.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Bella. Talking about feedback, when you're in a team and let's say your team is not doing well and you want to give them feedback, but you're also, scared of coming off as like authoritative and stuff. And so how do you give feedback and how do you learn to give a feedback? Because we learn about like how to implement feedback, like thinking it's a gift and stuff, but how do you, as a good leader, give feedback?
That's a great question. And I do think that some of that depends on whether you're an unofficial or an official leader of the team. But I will say that I never give feedback to someone that I haven't already tried to prove to them that I have their best interests at heart. And so if I come into a room and somebody I don't know is doing something that I think is ineffective, it is very, very hard for me to get them to trust me enough to give them feedback. So among the first things I ever do with the team is show them, whether I'm a colleague of theirs or their leader, is to show them that I care about them and I have their best interest at heart. And once they know you want them to be successful, then it's very important to keep some of the judgment, like you never use the word always, never, some of the basics, but also to tell them, if you can, find a strength of theirs and say, you're really good at this. And if you did that more often over here, you could be successful in this place where you're not being successful. So that is one strategy. And then the other strategy is to talk with them about what their goal is and how their certain behaviors not meeting that goal. Like I said, feedback to me, I've been very lucky to get a lot of feedback over my life, and some of it comes in hot. And so I have had the experience of saying, I am trying, I want this to happen, and have somebody say, well, how's that working out for you? And that is great if I totally trust that person. But if you haven't built that trust up, that's your first step. You have to make somebody trust you and believe that you're on their side.
Hello. Hi, Kristin. My name is James. You spoke a lot about balancing some of the lessons that you learned and how you shaped it from like your personal life. I'm a little curious about what you think about how to balance humility versus like self-deprecation, or confidence versus arrogance in leadership.
That's a great question, because there is a fine line, and it's everybody's own personal authenticity that makes you, that is where you strike your balance. But I would say that you have to think hard when you say something or when you do something, that are you doing it because, are you being so humble or expressing so much humility because you're afraid that you don't deserve to be there? Now, if that's what you're doing, that's too much in that direction, right? But and be careful about what you're humble about. Don't be humble about your qualifications to be there. You don't need to brag about that, but you shouldn't be humble about that. What you can be humble about is your own personal foibles, things that you acknowledge you're not great at. And let people know that about you. I can't navigate my way out of a paper bag. I have a son who, when he was 3, helped me get places. I don't mind joking about that. I have 4 dogs because I have absolutely no self-control when it comes to rescue events. So I can joke about my own, bad decisions, if you will, when you're talking about trying to board 4 dogs when you're going on vacation. But I never talk about how, I don't know distributed networks, because that's my job to, that's part of what I do. And so think about whether you're doing it from fear or not. And the same with arrogance and assertiveness. If you are trying to tell people how good you are at something because you're afraid they might not think you're good enough, then take a little bit of a step back and prove your competence through action rather than through telling. And I will tell you that that's actually been my bigger problem from a personal standpoint. When I started in the tech industry, so I can't believe I'm doing this in public, and I'm only doing this because I adore Jay, but I just missed my 40th college reunion. So I got an electrical engineering degree and computer science degree from MIT in 1983. And then I went on to get and I have not admitted that year in public. It's only doing this because of you. And then I got a master's degree from Washington University and worked for Bell Labs. And I thought people would take me a little more seriously than they did in 1983, 84, when I got into the tech industry. And nobody, I think I was telling some people during the break, someone asked me how I dealt with imposter syndrome when I first started working. I didn't have imposter syndrome. I couldn't get anyone to treat me like an engineer. And so a lot of that has changed. I work in an organization where I'm very well respected. And I'll be darned if sometimes someone doesn't say something that's slightly condescending, and everything in me wants to tell them, oh, I know what I'm talking about. And so I have to check myself and say, am I proving this person wrong in public because I'm so afraid people are still treating me like that? And so it's really, really being in touch with yourself. I think someone's got a microphone for her.
What can you do when someone undermines your leadership?
Because they will try, they will for their own reasons, their own insecurities, fears, or whatever. And so it's a continuum. Sometimes when someone tries to do that to me, I feel like, I just need to toughen up, water off a duck's back. I'm going to ignore that person and I'm going to keep going. Other times, I've gone all the way from, I need to find a new job because this is a hostile workplace. And so that is a continuum. And you need to know from how many allies you have in that organization, how much you think you can change things, and how significant that person is in whether you're going to be able to do what you want to do. So like I said, everything from to, okay, it's time to move on. It's time to find a better place where I can be the leader, the contributor that I want to be.
Hi, Kristin. Thanks for your talk. Question I have for you is, how do you be more assertive in an environment which is not supportive?
That is a tough one. And again, it's one of those things where if it's really, really a bad environment, work there while you need to and find another job. Because I don't want anybody to be like having to give up their apartment because I told them to get out of a hostile workplace. Work there until you find another job. But if it's not that, and if you being assertive is something you need those friends for, you need feedback. You need people to tell you at a meeting that you went too far, you didn't, people that you really trust, and not just your cheerleaders, but the people who can say, you might have got a little bit too far. How about if you try this? One of the most effective tools for disarming a group of people when you're trying to be assertive is humor. Now, you can't overuse this in the workplace, but you should be willing to have a little bit of a laugh, and not always at your expense, certainly not ever at anybody else's expense, but at the expense of the situation. And so you can say, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt everybody, but we've got 8 minutes and we've got to get this moving. So we've got to make a decision. It seems to me like it's between this and this. Am I getting this right? And sometimes part of being assertive is, here's what I'm thinking. Here's where I think we should go. What am I missing? And so that is a way to be assertive control the conversation, but still not come off as arrogant. But if you can't even do something like that, it might be time to, and it doesn't mean you have to leave an entire company. You know, I work for Salesforce. There's 60,000 people, 70,000 people. Every company is microcultures. And so you might just need to be with a different boss or a different team. But don't take somebody else's opinion on and not try to be assertive. Try to do it in a way that's genuine to you. And if it really, really doesn't work, then you might need to find somewhere else.
Hey, I'm Sam. So I used to coach like high school football too, and so I kind of know the pains and struggles of like trying to coach kids and whatnot. So one of the biggest kind of struggles I had when I was like coaching or like in any sort of like leadership role that I've had is kind of, breaking the bad news and telling people like, hey, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it a certain way, right? And getting people to kind of buy into that, right? You can explain to them, hey, I'm going to do it this way, whatever. But then getting them to buy in, whether they agree or disagree with that decision. So like any advice or tips you have on, getting people to kind of buy into your decision?
Yeah, when I joined her, so I am, oh, I don't know what that is. Oh, don't leave before you leave. Yes, that's, but I've been at Heroku for 2 years. I've been at Salesforce for 7, but I took the job at Heroku 2 years ago. And we had to make some changes. So the way you get as many people as possible to come along is you understand their motivations and either figure out how their needs can be met with the direction that you're going in. But there may be people who don't want to be part of what you're doing and feel so strongly that they disagree with it, that you're going to lose some people off the team. Now, some of them end up at MuleSoft because of one of the architects that I said, thank you very much, but we're not doing things that way. And he couldn't wrap his head around it, found another position. He's fully employed and doing just fine. So sometimes you are going to lose people off the team. And I'm going through that right now. We had somebody who just couldn't get on board with a new direction. And one of the things you have to be really careful about when that happens is that person, remember, is also a leader in certain circles. And so you need to make sure you are looking around them to make sure you don't lose not just him or her, but you don't lose the people that could get on board, but are following that person. So if I decide that a person, I just can't get them, then I go into what I call damage control and I make sure I at least get the rest of them. The thing that you can't do is you can't not go the direction you want to because you're afraid you're going to lose some person. And you also can't allow them to stick around and completely undermine you. You just can't. And so it's tough, but as long as you're doing what I talked about with the whole team, then you won't lose the whole team when you lose one person.
Voice from yesterday's gone.
Yeah.
So my name is Ebony, and this is a really timely conversation because it's interesting. A group of us were just having a talk about just like working with coworkers and personalities during lunch. And so my question is, I worked at a few companies where we've done these color-coded battery survey type of evaluations where we kind of learned each other's communication style, leadership style based off a color or a letter that you identify with. So what value do you believe these survey results provide or not provide when it comes to leading people?
So I have also taken a million of those surveys, and I think they provide some value, but I think you can't over-index on them. The value they provide is twofold. One is, so for me, and I think for most people that take them, finding out that not everybody thinks like you is actually really useful, and in what way. So if you've been like I'm on the blue-green axis, and then finding out there are people on the yellow-red axis, was like, really? And then, but what if it's a person you respect and they're on the yellow red? So it's actually really useful for you to understand that people think differently. Some people are playing baseball to keep playing, and some people are playing baseball to win the game. So it's very important from that perspective. But you also can't over-index on it. You can't say, oh, we're an engineering team, so people on that have this quality from the survey should be the leaders, and these people should be the followers. That's garbage. That's complete garbage. Anybody that with any 4-letter abbreviation from Myers-Briggs or any whatever can be anything. The useful piece of that is understanding how you think, and then being able to engage with a person that doesn't think like you. One of the things that the blue-green thing, and I think it's yellow-red. I actually mentor a group of sophomores at MIT every January, and we all take the personality test. And you can imagine MIT people are pretty blue-green, but every once in a while there's a yellow-red person. Some of the professors come in and confess that they're yellow-red. And what they talk about is the role they play in the organization, that you have to have, it's not an analytical, nothing's a purely analytical issue. You have to win the hearts and minds of people. And so people won't buy the best technology. They'll buy the technology that they think speaks to them the most. And that's very much along the yellow-red. And so I've learned over the years to value all the different quadrants and all the different letters. So I think it's very useful for that, but it's not useful to tell you what you should do with your life, because you can do anything.